Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we'll be talking about breaking that stigma of abuse pain. So many people go through it but never want to talk about it because they're afraid of what people would say. My guest will be telling us her own journey and how she found the courage to go out and break that stigma, leave that abusive relationship, write a book, and help others who might be going through it. My guest is Nenia Corcoran, as she'll be discussing being a survivor of both domestic abuse and sexual abuse, and how she strives to educate and empower women to recognize and prevent violence from happening. You know, it is so important that you recognize when these things are happening. What are the signs that tells you this should be enough? You need to go out of this place. But before we get started, let me give you a little bit about my guest today, a little bit of her bio. As a survivor of both domestic violence and sexual assault, she wants to educate people and let them know this warning signs, what triggers this out, and how to put a stop to it. She's a certified New Hampshire police officer with 10 years experience and a SWAT operator certificate. During her tenure at the Central New Hampshire Special Operations Unit, she's proudly the only active female SWAT operator in the state of New Hampshire. I have to applaud her for that. I will be asking her about that, the journey, how she found the courage to take on SWAT, to go into this field as the only female. She has written a number of books. One of her books called He Loves Me Not is available wherever books are sold. And her second novel, A Picture Worth 1,000 Words. She's also written a short book titled Things I Didn't Learn in School, which is also available on Amazon. Meet my wonderful guest, Nenia Corcoran, as we discuss abuse pain and finding your joy in the midst of your trouble. Meet Nenia. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. As I said in my introduction, today's conversation is one, if you're going through any abuse, the pandemic, on a serious note, the pandemic has caused so much abuse in homes everywhere, and even employees, because a lot of people are frustrated. And this conversation is really for you. If you're going through that kind of pain, listen to this conversation, because there is always a way out. A lot of us stay in this abusive relationship or domestic violence, and just because we don't know we can actually get out of it. My guest, Nenia, will be telling us about her own journey, how she got out, what it truly means to be in those kind of relationships, the signs, the warning signs that you might think are actually normal, but actually not quite normal. Nenia, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super delighted. I mean, at the time, you know what's going on in the world. Well, we were locked in for many months. I mean, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're living in. People were staying at home, and we saw the domestic abuse, violence, and all kinds of pain within the home go skyrocket, like literally skyrocket, and it was just so sad to see a lot of women not being able to talk about it or how to come out of it. And there you are. You are a godsend, because everyone needs to hear this word from you. Before we get started, who are you?
So my name is Nenia Corcoran. I am a police officer for 10 years. I have been an author more recently, just for the past year or so. I am a speaker, and I am a survivor of both domestic abuse and sexual assault. And I share my story because I did feel entirely alone when I was experiencing my abuse, and I did feel like I couldn't talk to anyone. And the truth is, this really is happening around the world more often than we want to admit. So you're not alone, and you don't have to suffer in silence. And so that's why I'm sharing my message, to show that it really can happen to anyone, and that it's okay to talk about it and to share what's going on so that we can change that attitude.
Absolutely, because it's something that I think it's that fear if I say something, who would actually listen to me, who would actually take my words seriously? Is it just
Mhm.
something I'm just saying to them and then no one really understands what I'm saying? Is it something that I should just be there for whoever I need to be there? When you look at your background, can you tell us a little bit about your background growing up?
So I actually met my abuser when I was just 11 years old. We were together, we grew up together. Our parents were friends, and our relationship started as a friendship. And it was a toxic friendship, but I grew up in that time where, I can't tell you how many times I heard the saying, boys are mean to you because they like you.
Yeah.
And that was this relationship. My abuser was constantly verbally abusing me and putting me down and making me feel self-conscious and making me the butt of his jokes. But he was also sweet and charming and nice to me when it was just him and I. And he would always, tell me, well, I'm so glad that you can take a joke and that we can have this relationship. And even though he was the same age as I was, he was grooming me for this future relationship and making me feel like that was my place in the relationship. And so it happened in front of, our parents and adults and all of these teachers and people who I felt like if something was wrong, they would have said something. So I grew up in this kind of with this attitude that like, this is just how our relationship is. And this is just how we are. And so my whole childhood really kind of centered around him too. So when I think about how I grew up and how my self-esteem developed and how my self-image developed, his voice is what I hear because he was always right there. He was my best friend until we started dating. So part of that is I spent so long with him, 15 years, because he was that voice in my head. He was what made me me, and I didn't know who I was without him.
And how did it transpire from okay, this normal talk? Because we've all got that in school, high school, where you have someone who constantly picks on you. I remember in high school, I was always picked up a little either because I was too tiny, and I always had someone, especially the guys, they always picked on me, and I just like really could not take it. I used to run away from them. So from yours, when did it really go into now? This is no longer just someone who's making fun of me in people's space. This is now something more serious. When did you notice that?
Honestly, I didn't. We were married before I realized that this was a problem because it was just how we interacted, how he interacted with me. So it had become so normal in my relationship that I almost didn't even notice it anymore. That was just how we communicated, or how he communicated with me. So when we were in our late teens, and that like 18 19, where things started to become more serious and we started to actually become a couple, and this could be my forever relationship, I didn't think of this as a bad thing. I thought of it as like, oh, we have this fun relationship where like we can tease each other. And I would think of it like that it was a thing that both of us did, even though the teasing was only one way. And it never occurred to me that that was weird or that was bad until the point where I started looking back on my entire relationship with fresh eyes after the abuse became noticeable abuse to me. And that's when I was like, oh my God, this has been toxic since the beginning. I never saw it that way while I was in it.
So anyone going through this kind of pain right now, how would you demonstrate some of the pains you went through in that relationship?
So before I recognized that this was abuse, I was confused because I had this, quote unquote, perfect relationship where I had the guy that everybody was jealous of. I had the football player in high school. He was a veteran. He was big and strong, and he was the guy that everybody wanted to be with. And I was that lucky girl that got to be with him. And so I didn't understand why I wasn't happier. I had like this kind of reserve, and I was always a little bit upset when I was at home, and I could never put my finger on why. And, when we would be out in public, I would get embarrassed by some of the things that he would say, and I would kind of shrink into myself. But I would put on this face that everything was fine for my friends and everybody, because that's what they expected from me, because they were so used to our relationship being that way that like they just expected me to laugh it off. And that got harder and harder as time went by, because the things that he was saying were, you know, degrading and hurting my self-image and my self-confidence. But they have been going on for so long, I almost didn't realize that that's what the cause of all of that pain was. So I just felt badly all the time, and I really couldn't put my finger on it until that moment when I was like, when I had my epiphany moment and was like, I am in an abusive relationship. And that's when I could turn that lens and be like, all of these things are what led me to this moment. It wasn't just one thing.
Mm. So when you look back and you said, okay, this is my moment, I think something is wrong here. This is not a usual thing. This is not a way someone needs to talk to someone. This is not a way you need to respect me as a person. When did that moment come that you realized that this is not normal? When did you get it in you? Did someone tell you and call you, Nina, I don't think he's talking to you right. I don't think you're in a right relationship. Or did you go to counseling? Or did you go to any religious group that helped you get yourself out? What happened that made you realize that this is the time?
So I did go to counseling later on, but my epiphany moment actually happened at work. I was working the night shift as a police officer, and I had probably, at this point, I was 3 or 4 years into my career, and I had probably been to hundreds of altercations between couples, domestic disputes, that kind of thing. And I would have prided myself on being able to say that like I was really good at picking that out in other people's relationships. When things were not healthy, when things were toxic, I could see it and I could offer advice and things like that to the best of my abilities. Mm-hmm. And so I went to this call and I was speaking with this woman, and I was getting really upset because she just was not ready to admit that she was in a toxic relationship, that she was in this abusive space. And no matter what I said, I just couldn't get through to her. She just wasn't ready. And I was really getting upset. And I couldn't figure out why, because this was just one of hundreds of calls I had been on like this. And there does come a point where, as a police officer, there's nothing more you can do. You have to walk away. And I reached that point with this woman, and I was just mad, you know, and I get in my cruiser, and I had driven a little ways away, and I went to go write my notes for the call. And I was sitting there and I realized everything that I was writing about this woman and about her relationship could also have my name in front of it and could apply to me. And it just kind of hit me sitting there that like the reason I was so upset is because this guy reminded me so much of my husband, and what they were dealing with was so much like what I was dealing with. And so I was giving her the advice that I really should have been giving me. And that's when it hit me. And it was a really hard thing to realize in that moment, especially when I'm so used to being the one on the other side, the one on the protector side, the one that's making things better. And now I realize that everything's flipped and I am actually a victim.
In hindsight, when you look back, all right, and any young girl listening to this right now who might be going through with the pandemic and everything that's happened in the world today, a lot of people are sitting at home and sitting in their relationship saying, what am I doing? When you look back, what are some of the early warning signs for people to look out for to understand that this relationship might not be the best relationship to be in?
So I think the earliest warning signs really are that verbal abuse that happens. And it's not so much the teasing, but how it makes you feel. And so your partner should never intentionally make you feel badly about yourself. And so if you're having those conversations, if he's using nicknames that really hurt your feelings and make you feel bad, that's not healthy. If you're teasing each other about something that makes you laugh and you know that you are also a part of the joke and that you know it is funny, that's not a bad sign, because you still feel good at the end of that teasing and at the end of that joke, right? But if you are feeling like, if you leave that situation, or if you know go into the next room and feel like, oh my God, he did that. Like, I hate when he does that, that kind of feeling, that's an early sign. And so, for instance, my abuser used to pick on things that he knew upset me. Like, being perfectly candid, I have a bump in my nose that really upsets me, or upset me when I was a kid. And so whenever we were in public, he would use nicknames like Toucan Sam and Pinocchio and things like that, that would draw attention to something that I was really self-conscious about and would make me really upset. So it wasn't a joke that I thought was funny. It wasn't a nickname that I enjoyed. It was something that he was intentionally doing because he knew that upset me. He knew that hurt me. And so that's the difference. The difference is how it makes you feel. And if it makes you feel upset and you say to him, hey, I don't like that, can you not do that anymore? And he says, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like I won't do it again. And he really doesn't do it again, then that was a mistake, a one-time thing. But if he knows that that thing that he's saying, or he or she, I'm sorry, my abuser was a he, so I always use the he pronoun, but anyone can be an abuser. But so he knowing that he was saying something that was deeply hurting me over and over and over, that's when we get into that space of this is toxic, this is abusive, this is verbal abuse, because he knows that's hurting me and he's doing it intentionally. Those are the early signs.
And when you look back, did you ever sit down with him to have this conversation, to say to him, look, I don't like the way you're talking to me. It makes me feel uncomfortable in public. I think if you want to say these kind of things, why not say it at home? Because I'm embarrassed. I don't like. Did you ever try to have that conversation with him?
So not in such an adult way, but there were definitely times that I mentioned things and he would tell me like, oh my God, you're so sensitive. Like, why are you so upset about that? It's not a big deal. Or he would turn it around and say, I never said that, or I don't know what you're talking about. Or, that was when he would flip and start gaslighting, or really trying to make me feel like whatever it was me making a big deal out of it, not him. And so he would always spin the blame back on me. And then I would feel silly being like, you're right, I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Like, I shouldn't be self-conscious about that in the first place. So you're right. And it would spin back on me feeling guilty for sticking up for my feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is also a sign of a toxic relationship. You should be able to express those things and be taken seriously and respected when you say, I don't like that.
Yes, no, absolutely. Because that's a big problem. A lot of people find is that even when they try to express themselves, they find the blame comes automatically, because they're very good at, these guys or women are very good at knowing how to turn the pins around back to you, because they know your confidence already is not there. I love what you do, Nina, because you used your book to train and share your experiences to empower and educate young adults on toxic relationship, dating violence, and consent. Why did you decide to go so public and help other people who are going through similar pain?
Well, like I said, I met this man who was a boy when I met him when I was just 11 years old, and no one had ever had that conversation with me to teach me what a toxic relationship was. Like, I remember the assemblies in school when they would have the conversation, and domestic violence was this like someday problem that wouldn't really affect us, but maybe you should know about it kind of thing. Yeah. And they didn't make it real. They didn't make it so that it seemed like it could affect us at that time. And so I didn't know that these things that I was experiencing weren't normal. I didn't know that they were signs of toxic relationships. And I really, truly feel that if someone had taught me that early enough, I might have not ended up in this 15-year relationship. I might not have married this man that was abusive. So I wanted to do something that would reach that age range of these young adults who are just starting that journey and maybe can save themselves from the pain that I had to deal with. So as a huge nerd, writing is my favorite way to express myself. And that was how I wanted to reach this age group, because when I was that age, I didn't have a book to find that information in. I didn't find those characters, and I was an avid reader. So I wanted to put that out into that space so that there was a book like that. And that is how He Loves Me Not came to be.
And how did you find your own voice? Because it takes courage to mental strength. It takes a lot of things to be able to be out there and say, this has happened to me. How did you find that confidence in yourself that I'm not going to go through this anymore? This is enough.
I'll be perfectly honest, it was hard because as a police officer, I was really ashamed to say that I had been on the other side of this. I thought it made me weak. I thought it made me not, capable of doing my job. I thought people would think that, like, well, she can't protect herself in her own house. How can she protect me? And so I was really ashamed and really afraid of people finding out about this. And it took a long time for me to realize that I'm not the one that should feel ashamed. I'm not the one that did anything wrong. He's the one that should feel like he did something wrong. He's the one that this shame and this blame should be on. And so I really felt like I needed to turn that around so that it wasn't my fault. And I started with opening up to my fellow police officers, which was the group that I was most afraid of finding out, because I felt like they would think less of me and I didn't want that. And they were so supportive. Wow. That I was like, okay, I can share this message. If my fellow police officers can stand behind me and say, no, this doesn't make her weak, this makes her strong, then I can share this and I can tell other people that they're just as strong and that they don't have to hide behind that label of victim, because it's not a bad thing. You're not the one that did anything wrong.
When you look back, are there different forms of abuse? When, for example, people might ask, well, I'm in an abusive relationship, but I don't know what kind of relationship this kind of abuse is, but I know I am in abusive because I don't feel comfortable. In your opinion, do you think there are different kinds of abuses out there?
Oh, absolutely. I find in my experience that they go hand in hand. Usually someone who is a victim of one form of abuse is a victim of several different forms of abuse. I specifically found myself as a victim of verbal abuse, as a victim of physical abuse, as a victim of financial abuse, as a victim of sexual abuse. There's also spiritual abuse. There are tons of different forms of abuse, and no one form is less or worse than another. And I find that a lot of people say to me, well, I'm not in an abusive relationship because my partner has never hit me. And that is not a prerequisite of being in an abusive relationship. That is one form of abuse, and it's the form that we talk about the most and seems to get the most like airtime, like on, in the media and things like that. But just because you've never been struck by your partner doesn't mean that you're not experiencing any of the other forms of abuse that are just as emotionally and physically harmful to your body. That stress is actually harming your body, whether you know it or not. Yeah. So all of the forms of abuse can be harmful.
I love that you touched on that there, the different forms of abuse, because it's almost like an illness. There's the invisible illness and there's the visible illness. And the visible illness always gets attention. People talk about it more, not realizing that people suffering from invisible illness have, they really have to fight and get that attention. And that really causes more stress in the body, more pain, because of the pain of people not understanding what you're going through. When you tell your parents or when you tell anyone, I'm going through this is really affecting me this way, the first thing they look at you, where's the mark on your body? I don't see anything. Yep. So now go back home, you're fine. Is he hitting you? No. Is he doing this? No. So have you got any bruises to prove it? So I think I love that you said that there are different forms of abuse and that we should be aware of the other forms as well, not just the abuse of the hitting for abuse.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect analogy, because that is the first thing that people say. Well, do you have any marks? Do you have any bruises? They picture victims to have black eyes and split lips and be wearing the dark sunglasses and lots of makeup to cover it up. And that's just not the reality of what a victim needs to look like. You don't have to fit that mold. There is no perfect victim. And it really is difficult to explain some of these other forms of abuse to someone else, because you can feel like it doesn't make sense because it's hard to put into words. It's hard to explain. And so that can make you feel like maybe I am overreacting or maybe I am crazy. But it's all the little things that pile on top of each other and how those things make you feel. It's very rarely just one thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you decided to go into to become you were a police officer, and not just that, you got your SWAT operation certificate. I thought, wow, how did you do it? Because I know I watch SWAT all the time, the TV program, and I'm presuming it's not that easy to get get there. How did you decide? Why did you decide to become a police officer? And how are you using that chapter of your side of your life to help other women out there?
So I grew up in a military family. My dad has been in the military for 30 years. My grandfather was a police officer. My brother went into the military. So I knew that that kind of service is what I wanted to do, but I wanted to serve people at home. I wanted to feel like I was making a difference here, whereas my dad and brother were making a difference other places. So I knew that that was where I wanted to go. And my abuser at the time was very not supportive of that, because he was very of the opinion that women do not belong in that space. He would discourage me from doing it. But at the time, he was also in the military and he was stationed far away. So I just kind of did it and went forward and went to the academy and became a police officer. And he didn't really have a lot of say in it, luckily. And once I was in police work, I loved the opportunity that it gave me to interact with people and to make a difference and to, go and see people on sometimes the worst day of their lives and be able to be that like one bright part of the day. Like this one person took care of me when I really needed it. And it is a hard space to be a woman in still, even though it's gotten so much better than past stories. There are women who led the way for us to be able to be in this space, but it still is a difficult space to be in. And unfortunately, I had some coworkers that didn't believe that I should be there and actually told me that a woman couldn't be on the SWAT team. So I said, hold my drink and here I go. So that was kind of what motivated me to do that. And I did make the team and was on the team for about 2 years. And it was an amazing experience. I learned so much. I learned a lot about myself because surrounded by these guys in these really stressful situations, like I held my own, and I can be proud of that. And they respected me and knew that I was, capable and could help them complete whatever it was that we were trying to complete. And that was really important to me. So that was a great experience that I had. That I'm very proud of, and I hope that more women get into that space and start exploring that as an option, because it's actually really cool.
Did it help you with dealing with your abuser at that time? Like I read that you were at one time the only active female SWAT operator in the state of New Hampshire.
Yes.
I really congratulations, by the way. That's amazing. How are you now encouraging more women to go out there and chase this opportunity? And also, does it help you deal with any pain that was going on at home, like the abusive pain and stuff?
So this getting on the SWAT team actually happened for me just after I left my abusive relationship. And it was before I had shared what I was going through with all of my coworkers and teammates. So being able to accomplish that and be on that team and really get to feel like I was the best of the best really helped my self-confidence at that time, because when I was not at work, I didn't know who I was. I was still trying to figure out, I had spent 15 years being the person that he wanted me to be. And now all of a sudden I was just like kind of on my own. And that space, being a police officer, being a SWAT officer, was the one thing I was sure of. It was the one thing I really knew for sure, that not only was I capable, but I was good at it. And so that is, I think, what held me in place while I kind of figured the rest of my life out. And I'm so grateful for it. I guess in a way it was my own like first step towards therapy. I did seek traditional therapy as well, but this was really something that kind of helped me keep my head on straight and start figuring out who I was on my own.
And is it difficult as a woman to do it?
It is, because it's not designed for us. You know, the equipment's not designed for us. The tests, the physical aspects there, it's not designed for our body types and our particular types of strength. So, you know, it was the physical fitness test was an obstacle course that everyone had to complete the same way. And I was able to complete it, but I had to train really hard to be able to do that. And it's certainly something that it required a lot of upper body strength, which is not a female's strong point. Usually our strength comes from our hips and our legs. And so there was a lot of things that weren't just inherently easy. There were guys on that team that didn't train at all and went out and just like easily did this obstacle course. And so it was much harder as far as that aspect. But then even just the equipment and stuff like that I was wearing, it was bulkier because it didn't fit me right, and it wasn't designed for a woman's body, so it like sat weird on my hips and all of that stuff. And so it's just that, and there is no alternative. You don't go to the store and say like, okay, here's the male SWAT stuff and here's the female SWAT stuff. Like, that doesn't exist. So you just have to kind of adapt. And it's just another challenge that they don't think about. And then there's even like the silly things, like when we would be on a call for hours and hours and hours, and, you know, the guys are just kind of disappearing into the woods to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, okay, like, where's the nearest gas station? Like, you know, it's things that you don't think about. And so there were a lot of difficulties that just kind of popped up that I had to adapt with. And hopefully in a few years, when there are more women in this space and more women, you know, pursuing these goals and these dreams, that people will realize like, okay, we should change how we do things so that they feel a little bit better.
Oh, that's absolutely so true. That's things we tend to not think about, but when reality hits, when you go in there, then you realize there's so much things. There's a big difference between the man and the woman. There's things, the way our body sits, the way we could go to the toilet. No, totally different. Yeah, I love how you just made this very, very, very vital point. You're an author. Congratulations. You know, you're going from everything you've been through. You're still an author. You're definitely a geek because you've written 3 books. Yeah, like You Lost Me Not. Yeah, I think the first one, your second novel, A Picture Worthy of 1,000 Words. And then you did a short read, Things I Didn't Learn in School. I'm like, okay, things I didn't learn in school. That one you have to talk to me about. And how has your message changed over time in terms of how you help victims approach the gender-based violence? How has that message changed? And also tell me about Things I Didn't Learn in School.
So Things I Didn't Learn in School is a short read so my other 2 are fiction novels. And this one is more of me speaking directly to the reader and teaching them some lessons that I had to learn the hard way and that I feel like should be common knowledge. And it's not all, there are several things. There's some things about sex, how to deal with sexism in there, where I tell some stories from my police work and my SWAT team journey. But there's also things like some lessons I didn't learn about money and, you know, college and how there are other options out there. So it's not one specific type of lesson, but just all of these things that I feel like somebody should have told me at some point before I had to figure them out the hard way. So I really enjoyed writing that one as just kind of almost an open letter to the reader to be like, there's all of these other things out there and there's all of these lessons that no one's going to tell you, but here's my experience with them. And then my two novels both focus on just things that are really hard to talk about, but more people than we want to admit are going through them. So He Loves Me Not is about dating violence and consent and just that toxic relationship, and hopefully teaching those lessons early. And then A Picture Worth 1,000 Words is kind of a snapshot of high school and how rumors can affect self-esteem and really ruin a person's life. So those two novels are both kind of inspired from experiences that I had, though they are not true stories. Well, A Picture Worth 1,000 Words is based on a true story, but it's not my true story. So people often ask me, like, are these your story? And they are not, but they are. There is a lot of feelings in them that are very real and feelings that I did experience. It's just not my story.
Finally, Nina, girls watching this thing will be so delighted that someone like you had, have a voice and have been out there. You utilize the writing to really share experiences, and you also talk openly about it. You talk about the discrimination and the difficulties in a male-dominated work. You talk about the abuse pain you suffered. What word of advice would you give to young girls coming up who might be going through abusive pain or sexism pain, to encourage them to keep going and find their joy?
So I think the biggest thing is realizing that you always can start over. You can always leave. And that is something that I really struggled with, because I had already married this man when I figured out that I was going through abuse. And so I was really terrified at the thought of starting over and having to tell people I made a mistake and that I shouldn't have married him and that I had to get divorced. And I was really, there were all of these other stigmas, like the abuse was one thing, but there was all this other stuff that I was worried about too. And for a period of time, I actually wondered whether it would be better for me to stay in the abusive relationship rather than deal with all of that outside
abuse
stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Outside abuse, yes, neglection. No, it's almost worse. It's both ways, because you leave and the outside world asks you, why did you leave?
Right.
You should have stayed. You should have managed it. You should have done that. Yeah.
And I did deal with that. I had people say, well, can't you fix it? Or, you were only married for a year. Did you really try? And these kind of things that really hurt at the time. But when I look back at it now, starting over, leaving that, it was hard. It was a really hard thing to do. And at the time I questioned it. I doubted it. I wondered if I made the right decision. But sitting here now, 6 years later, looking back on that, there is nothing that I would have changed about my decision to leave. I would have maybe made it 14 years ago instead of 15 years later. But leaving that relationship was the best thing I ever did. And it was challenging, and I did have to overcome a lot to get here. But this is where I think I belonged all along. And that hope and that bright light is on the other side of that. And so it's never too late. I hear people all the time say, well, I've been married for 20 years. Why should I bother trying to deal with it now? Because it's never too late to start over, find yourself and find your own joy.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to be miserable.
Yeah, it's so true. Thank you so much, Nina. I love this kind of message, because you are helping so many people out there who are going through a difficult time, not quite sure if they should be brave enough to do it. And also, I love what you did about taking on the SWAT role, because it shows women we could do anything if we really, really put our mind to it. As much as we might think, you said our body is not normally strong at the upper bits, but you still did it, and you figured a way out. You figured how to make things work for you. So we women, we could adapt, and we just have to believe in ourselves a little bit more to overcome the obstacle. Any final words?
I think that's a great message. You just have to believe in yourself to be able to do it, whether that's, joining the SWAT team or leaving your relationship. It's just put yourself first. Do what's best for you, and stop worrying about what other people think or what other people might say about it. You don't have to put them ahead of yourself.